Okay, welcome to week number 6. And in week number 6, we discussed this topic of performance evaluations and performance appraisals. Performance appraisals, one of my favorite topics in human resource management, because I like to view performance evaluation and appraisals as kind of being the linchpin that holds the entire human resource management process together. There's a very famous article several decades ago by a man named Charles Fox. And Fox, in his article, referred to performance appraisals as being the keystone of the human resource management process. And when you think about a keystone, you think about an arch made of stones. And that stone at the very top, at the very apex of the arch, is referred to as the keystone. That keystone holds all the other stones up. So if you remove that keystone, the entire arch will collapse upon itself. That's the idea in that Fox article, that if you don't do a good job with performance appraisal, then all the other parts of your human resource management process, whether it be training and development, work allocation, recruitment, selection, sanctioning, and discipline, all those other parts of that human resource arch will then collapse upon itself without that keystone of performance appraisal and performance evaluation. So it's imperative that we do a good job appraising the performance of our employees. So performance appraisal is the chief activity of public managers and public leaders. It provides crucial information on how effectively we recruited people into the organization. Did we recruit people in the organization with the requisite skills to do the job effectively? Has crucial information in terms of position management to make sure that people are in the correct positions and their skill sets align with the positions that they are in. It's crucial to use the results of this performance appraisal process to inform our decisions we make about training and development. And then obviously it will also be then tied to compensation as well, especially if we have bonus or merit pay or some system of pay for performance. However, even though it's very important, performance appraisal is challenging. It's challenging for any administrator or any manager because managers sometimes shy away from doing performance appraisal because of the stakes involved. They know that there are very significant consequences for the results of these performance appraisals. A poor performance appraisal could make it difficult for an employee to move up in their position to be promoted. It may direct an employee toward a training and development, which may take that employee out of their position temporarily while they go and acquire those new skills. When we do have compensation that's attached to performance levels, obviously that's a very important consequence. And so managers sometimes are hesitant to engage in a process that has such important consequences for their employees. Employees oftentimes shy away from performance appraisal processes as well for the fear of what we refer to as cognitive dissonance. So if an employee feels that they are doing a good job and they are proud of their performance, they're always afraid that they're going to get this performance appraisal that will tell them they're not doing that good of a job. And it will just confirm some of the things that they feel about themselves. That's what we call cognitive dissonance, getting information that you are not anticipating. And that can really lead to some hesitancy on the part of employees to be subject to a performance appraisal type of process. But a performance appraisal also can be valued by employees. It can be valued for intrinsic reasons, that it can validate one's workplace efficacy, and it can also have extrinsic types of values in terms of the potential rewards and recognition that you can get a la a Vroom theory of expectancy, that if you are going to believe you're going to get the rewards that you place a high valence level upon, then you're going to want to go through that appraisal process so that you can acquire those highly valued types of rewards and recognitions. Some of the challenges obviously associated with performance appraisal. Personnel sometimes are less certain about their position after the performance appraisal than they were before the performance appraisal. If they get some constructive feedback that tends to be negative and they're not anticipating any negative feedback, that could lead them to question themselves and question the job that they are doing. The higher that someone rises in the organization, sometimes the lower the likelihood that they will get quality feedback. Oftentimes, our managers and our supervisors don't have a rigorous assessment system in the same way that their employees do. And so the irony is, as people are in higher supervisory positions and there's more import to their decisions and their actions, sometimes they're the very ones who are subject to less performance appraisal than people who are situated below them in the organizational chart. We know that communicating negative information is difficult, but it's even worse not to communicate that information when it is necessary to be communicated. So you can't have all positive feedback with every single employee in every single situation. There will be some need at some time in performance appraisal to provide some negative feedback, some constructive criticism to help employees improve their performance. So why are performance appraisals so important in the public sector today? Well, I think their importance really began with the reaction to the spoils patronage system. We know that in the era of spoils and patronage that ran from about 1828 up until the passage of the Pendleton Act in 1883, we were hiring people based upon who they knew, based upon the candidate and the political party that they supported, as opposed to hiring people based upon their qualifications, their merit, and their skills. So because of all the corruption and all the malfeasance and misfeasance that went on during the era of spoils, once we moved into the era of merit after the passage of the Pendleton Act, we really started realizing that we needed to have some performance indicators. We needed to have some assessment of employee performance. Then, as the federal government grew in the wake of the Great Depression and the implementation of FDR's New Deal policies, as the country moved into World War II and started ramping up in terms of the government paying for a lot of these programs and government paying for a lot of the resources necessary to successfully carry out World War II, you had this growth in government. And with this growth in government, you then again have this renewed interest in conducting a rigorous system of performance appraisal. So today, performance appraisal is, well, as we said at the outset here, the keystone, the activity, if you will, that really holds all of the other parts of the human resource management process together. It is important to note that my favorite answer to every question is it depends, and that answer is very true here with performance appraisals. There is no one best performance appraisal approach to use. What we are trying to do is we're trying to design the most appropriate appraisal format and process for our given situation. So the process should comprise of a minimum of 4 different elements: an initial goal setting meeting, monitoring and data availability, continuous feedback, and then an annual assessment. It's very important not to skip, especially that initial goal setting meeting, because when setting that initial goal setting meeting, you are essentially clarifying with the employee what the expectations of the position are and what types of goals that employee has in carrying out their daily jobs. And so it kind of clarifies what's going to be expected in that position, so there aren't a whole lot of surprises later on once they get the results of that performance appraisal. Oftentimes, as we had talked about in a previous video, using a results-oriented job description can be very useful. By embedding those performance expectations directly in the job description, then you are alerting the employee to here are the performance expectations, so that if they don't meet those performance expectations, they are not shocked if they get some negative or some constructive criticism in their performance appraisal results. Traditionally, when we did performance appraisals, we tended to do trait-based types of appraisals. In a trait-based type of system, we were appraising the employee's personal characteristics and the personal characteristics that we thought were important for that job. So perhaps timeliness and punctuality, perhaps their tendency to seek out responsibility and accountability. Those types of things are traits that we would measure in a trait-based system. The problem with trait-based systems is that they're inherently subjective, and it's sometimes difficult to overcome a lot of our reliability and validity problems with those types of trait-based systems. So instead, where we have shifted is we have shifted more toward behavior-based systems, whereby we attempt to discern what someone is actually doing on the job and how well they are exhibiting those behaviors. Now, there are a variety of different performance appraisal approaches that can be used in an organization. You have probably run into many of these in your organization, in your current position. Very simple approaches such as what's called a graphic rating system. In a graphic rating system, you'll have a Likert ordinal response scale of, you may say the measure punctuality of the employee. So you're going to measure that type of a trait. And then you'll say a statement such as the employee is always on time for work. And then you'd have strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, strongly disagree. That's a graphic rating type of system. Sometimes the like or ordinal response categories will be excellent, good, fair, poor. It's a very simple, very quick system whereby the appraiser can just literally just check off those boxes. The problem with those graphic rating systems is they don't provide a whole lot of formative feedback. So are you doing a good job of getting projects done on time? Okay, that's good, but how do I get to the excellent level? What do I have to do in order to increase my performance ranking to that excellent level? I don't really get that with just a graphic rating type of an approach. You can always combine a graphic rating approach with an essay approach. So you give those ordinal rankings in the graphic rating approach, and then you connect that with an essay approach, whereby the supervisor can then provide some of that formative feedback. But the problem with that essay approach is that it can be highly subjective. Some supervisors are very good writers, some are not so good at writing, and so you can have a whole lot of subjectivity in terms of how those essays are written. In a behavioral based system, one approach that is used more and more by organizations is this BARS approach, which is behaviorally anchored rating system. This is a very similar system that you see with grading rubrics for the papers that you submit in the class. So when you submit your final assignment, your final paper in this class, there is a grading rubric that I will use to evaluate that paper. That grading rubric has the behaviors that will lead to certain types of evaluations. So an A grade would exhibit this type of behavior. A B grade exhibits this type of behavior. So the evaluation is anchored to certain types of behaviors that will lead to certain types of performance appraisals and outcomes. The BAR system is a much more involved and sophisticated process than just a simple trait-based system or a simple graphic rating or an essay-based system. So the question we have to ask is there this benefit cost analysis whereby the benefits of doing a BAR system will exceed the cost of doing this type of a performance appraisal process? We have to see that potential gains realized by using BARs warrant that additional investment of time and resources to create this type of a performance appraisal system. And oftentimes employees and employers prefer trait-based systems. It requires a lot less thought. You don't have to articulate specific behaviors on the part of the employer doesn't have to come up with these specific behaviors, and the employee doesn't have a whole lot to digest with that performance appraisal. It's just, yes, I got an excellent, or yes, I got a good in terms of my performance. Result-based systems are predicated upon approaches such as management by objectives, where we try to achieve congruence between organizational activities and goals and individual activities and goals. The problem that we have in terms of these result-based systems is, again, they're very time-consuming. You can have some conflicting objectives, and then which objective are you measuring and which objective are you valuing above another objective? And they tend to have an orientation on short-term as opposed to long-term goals. But the BARS approach is an approach that we typically see used more and more in organizations that have the resources and the time and the expertise to be able to use those types of systems. So what type of appraisal system should be used? Well, it depends upon the situation. Each of the systems have separate but distinct strengths and weaknesses, and there's really not a clear best choice for every single situation. And that's okay, because the technique itself is oftentimes not as important as how you do the evaluation in terms of the type of feedback that you are giving. You can ostensibly give good formative supportive feedback in a graphic rating system with an essay component. And it is possible you can give even more substantive feedback with that type of approach than with a more intense approach, such as a BARS approach. So it really depends upon the buy-in on the part of the manager and the employee and the types of formative feedback that can be utilized by that employee in order to change and augment their behaviors on a daily basis. So who does the rating? Well, we always think about it in a very top-down nature. We have supervisors who do the rating of employees' performance. but there are some other variations as well. We can use self-appraisals where we allow people to appraise their own performance. In my home program, I developed an assessment system of student learning outcomes, whereby in every core class we have an initial skills self-assessment and a final skills self-assessment, so that students can assess their skills upon entering the program or entering the course, and then self-assess their skills again upon leaving the course or leaving the program. Having that type of self-assessment is important for employees so that they can develop their own assessment of their performance. Obviously, there is some tendency for distortion whenever you have self-appraisal. You could have some self-congratulation or some self-incrimination, depending upon the personality of the employee, but at least gives them a chance to reflect upon their own performance. Peer evaluations have also become very common in most of our public organizations, but you need to have a high culture of trust between your employees before you can have a peer evaluation system. If employees don't trust the people who are evaluating them, obviously they're not going to trust the results of those evaluations. And 360-degree evaluation systems have become very, very common among managers and supervisors, whereby we can gather information from superiors, subordinates, peers, external stakeholders such as citizens, and you kind of do this 360 type of degree evaluation where you have all these committed and all these involved stakeholders who are providing an assessment of the performance of that employee. It's administratively complex, it's very time consuming, and when you use it for supervisors and managers, sometimes they don't trust the process because they feel it's an avenue for employees to get back at them for maybe a negative evaluation of that employee. So I served on a school board once, and one of the things we tried to do with our superintendent is to implement a 360-degree evaluation, and the superintendent was very much opposed to it because the superintendent felt that she had made some very difficult personnel decisions with some of her assistant superintendents, and she didn't really want those assistant superintendents to have this as a retribution against her in a way in which they could get revenge against her. But 360-degree evaluations have become relatively common, especially for supervisors, managers, and leaders. One of the problems in performance evaluation, obviously, is when we have measurement error. And we end up with rating errors for a variety of different reasons. And some of those reasons are listed there on the screen. It's just a selection of some of those possible rating errors that we tend to see. Things such as a compatibility error, where people will rate people who are similar to them or some people they like very highly. They feel compatible with that person. They're going to rank how compatible they are with the person as opposed to rating the actual performance of that employee. We can have things like the halo effect, and this is especially common with a graphic rating type of system, where every single criteria on that rating will be excellent, and they'll just go right down the row and make someone look angelic in terms of giving them all the highest ratings possible. The black mark effect is just the opposite of that, is that someone they don't like, they will just give them all very negative evaluations, irrespective of how well that reflects their actual performance on the job. Recency effect, if a major event occurs just before the time of the evaluation, it will overshadow all other incidents in the evaluation. So they will rank someone very poorly because that person may have made a mistake last week, or they may have had a negative interaction with that person last week, and that will then affect the entire performance. That one instance last week will affect the performance for that entire year, or the rating of the performance for that entire year. Contrast error is another rating area where we compare people relative to other people as comparing people relative to the performance standards. We have to remember that performance appraisal is rooted and moored in performance standards rather than being rated and moored in the performance of other employees. So we don't want to compare employee to employee. We want to compare employee performance to the standards designed for that employee and for that position. Sometimes rating errors come from intentional manipulation, leniency errors, the Santa Claus effect for people that they like, the severity error or the horns effect for people that they do not like. Severity effect, you give them negative ratings if you don't like them. Leniency error, you give them good ratings if you do like them. It kind of goes back to the organization theory that talks about managers developing dyadic relationships with their employees. And every manager will develop a different dyadic relationship with their employee. Some of those are very high trust relationships, some of those are very low trust relationships. If you have a high trust dyadic relationship with your employee, you may be more likely to fall prey to leniency error. If you have a low trust dyadic relationship, then you may fall prey to severity error. We also know that performance appraisal takes a lot of time and takes a lot of effort. And there's oftentimes not a lot of incentives provided to doing the performance appraisal process. In fact, there are usually far more disincentives than there are to incentives for management to appraise the performance of their employees. And again, as we had talked about before, human nature means that managers oftentimes don't want to be held responsible for the consequences that accrue because of these performance appraisals. And employees don't want to hear that negative feedback, that cognitive dissonance. And so both managers as well as employees will tend to try and shy away from the performance appraisal process. But it's important that performance appraisal, again, is central to the entire human resource management process itself. Because without performance appraisal, you're not going to be able to do a good job of all those other human resource management functions. We also know we need to be very aware of laws and potential liabilities that could be occurring because of conducting performance appraisals. We have to be mindful of potential for harassment and harassment laws. We have to be aware of potential for age discrimination, disability discrimination. If there are reasonable accommodations that have been established for this position, we have to take those reasonable accommodations into account as we prepare that performance appraisal. The potential for defamation or misrepresentation of the performance of the employee that could lead us or leave us open to scrutiny and perhaps even some type of litigation. And negligence. If we don't do a good, thorough job of performance appraisal, and then an employee loses a position or loses out on a promotional opportunity because of our negligence in not doing our job as managers in appraising the performance of our employees, that again could leave us open to scrutiny and perhaps even some legal action. So how do we improve this performance appraisal process? We develop an appraisal system that requires leadership to publicly commit to the program by providing resources needed and modeling appropriate behavior. We create a profile task force that represents all parts of the agency to conduct a needs assessment in the creation of this performance appraisal system. We implement our performance appraisal systems on a pilot trial basis so that we can then collect information about what is working and what is not working. Employees should be involved in this process of putting together performance appraisals. The more that they are involved in the performance appraisal process and the creation of it, the more likely they are to trust the results of that performance appraisal process. Whenever we have to connect discipline to the results of our performance appraisal, it can be very awkward and very difficult from a human nature type of perspective. The paradox is that when the need for adverse action is obvious, it is oftentimes less likely to occur. That in those types of situations where adverse action is really needed, it oftentimes is a much more uncomfortable situation of providing that adverse action. And so managers tend to shy away from providing that disciplinary action for people who need the disciplinary action the most. Just telling a manager to get tough with their employees is not going to be an effective approach. We need to provide them with the skills that they need in order to be able to decide what types of disciplinary action needs to be done and how to implement those disciplinary actions. Typically, there are a couple different types of systems in terms of discipline. There's progressive discipline, whereby we apply coercive measures in increasing degrees of severity. So the initial disciplinary measures are going to be relatively mild. And then if the behavior continues, they become more severe and more severe and more severe. Another approach is what's called corrective action, which is the application of reminders instead of reprimand. So it's kind of a softer, gentler way of doing progressive discipline in that we kind of, with corrective systems, we kind of rely upon the employee to get the reminder and then act upon that reminder. In progressive decision-making, we are actually having the employer who is applying these progressively more severe disciplinary measures throughout the process of discipline. So progressive discipline is based upon the employer making the decisions. Corrective action is more based upon the employee making the decisions based upon those reminders that they are receiving, as opposed to reprisals that they're getting from their managers. So in conclusion, performance appraisal really needs to be central to the entire human resource management process. The rating instruments, we should strive for simplicity rather than complexity. That if we have too complex of performance appraisal instruments, it's going to be confusing to implement, and it's going to be confusing for our employees to oftentimes consume that information they are getting. And these rating instruments need to be directly tied to a job analysis. So they're directly tied to the critical components and the critical aspects of the job. That people are not being evaluated on something that is not part of their job and doesn't contribute to doing the job effectively. We need to provide training to all employees and to managers in terms of how to develop and use performance appraisal systems. It's not just training our managers how to do performance appraisals, it's also training our employees how to navigate the process and how to accept some of this constructive criticism when it does come. So it's considered constructive criticism as compared to being cognitive dissonance. The review is grounded in accurate job descriptions, and actual ratings are based upon observable performance. Again, this is why a results-oriented job description is oftentimes so helpful for the performance appraisal process, because it will clue the employee into here are the performance expectations of the position, and then there are no surprises when they get the results of that performance appraisal. Evaluations are completed under standardized conditions and are free of adverse impact. So we want to make sure that we have a standard process for doing performance appraisals. So employees don't feel that, well, I'm being singled out for this appraisal because I raised an objection at our last staff meeting. No, you're getting this performance appraisal because it's part of the standard process. Everyone gets appraised every year. Everyone gets a performance appraisal every 6 months. So this is no adverse impact upon you. It's just part of the process of providing feedback to all the employees in the organization. Preliminary results are shared with the ratee, with the employee. These preliminary results can kind of ease the opposition of the employee whenever they get the final results of that performance appraisal. There is some type of upper level review or some type of appeal mechanism in place in case employees feel that the performance appraisal results are arbitrary or capricious or prejudicial. There's some appeals process they can go through for the purpose of due process. And there's some system of performance counseling and corrective guidance services, so that if we do see some performance deficiencies in this performance appraisal, there's some counseling, there's some professional development opportunities whereby we can correct that behavior so that the individual employee can then get a better performance appraisal the next time they stand for that evaluation. So again, it's very much creating a system of performance appraisal, not so much about the actual technique you use, but the system that you create. And the system that you create needs to include employees as well as managers. And the system that you create needs to be predicated upon the provision of formative feedback and fit well within your entire human resource management process. Because without a good system of performance appraisal, the entire human resource management process will collapse. So it's just a really quick overview of some of the highlights of performance appraisals and evaluations. You'll read more details this week as you move through your resources, both in the textbook as well as the videos that are provided in module number 6. As always, if you have any questions about the information, feel free to reach out and contact me. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week number 6, and I will follow up with a brief video on our week 6 assignments as well. So take care and have a great week.